It's impressive. I'll say that much, Dr. Director said, as she entered the subsequent basement Q science lab. Behind her, the medical team and a squad of Global Justice security officers wheeled Faye Morgan, still unconscious, in front of her. However, something she had never seen before. Under the direction of Wade and Anne, with some assistance from Jim and Tim, several different Global Justice technologies, plus a few gadgets and gizmos confiscated from various supervillains over the years, have been combined into a technological marvel, the central component of the cylindrical chamber, about the size of a phone booth. A small viewport was built at the eye level. Inside the chamber was a padded compartment designed for one occupant. A large virtual reality helmet was installed on top of it. From the cylinder came an array of cables, wires, and formula connecting to a large bank of computers. Those computers were wirelessly networked to each other and constantly feeding information to the helmet in the cylinder. Other cables and wires were connected to two large gun cannons mounted to the ceiling. Both trained the cylinder. More components were wired together in ways that they weren't used immediately apparent. In all, the thing was that the Nikola Tesla could have been invented for some sort of old B-movie. Glad you like it, Anne said, putting down a clipboard. Wade and the Dweebs had managed to free of the computer stations on the bank. Mind telling me what I'm looking at? Dr. Director asked. Put her in the cylinder, Anne told the medical team. The high-grade restraints you use for people like Shigo are in there, she said to Wade. Wade, I need to make sure she's connected up. Do you do the explain, will you? Wade nodded, and then walked over to the medical team while she got up and went over to Dr. Director. Director frowned. I really blew it with her, didn't I? She asked. I don't think you're getting a Christmas card this year, Wade said. You don't want to know what the Stoppables think of you just now. Probably not, Director agreed. So what exactly is this thing? Well, basically, it's a combination of hypnosis generator, modified VR simulator, that we hope to induce a hypnotic state in Faye, and when the variant on my What program, to create a mindscape where Kim and Faye can actually encounter with each other. And after all that, well, it's up to them. What programs? Director asked. Wade's holographic artificial training, Wade explained. It's a VR-trained simulator I have knocked up for Kim while back. In this case, all it was going to do is a series of patterns designed to put her into hypnosis if she were to wake up and happen before we're ready. What about monitoring? Dr. Possible has the usual medical alerts. EKG, EEG, cardiograph, and so on. But pretty much from our perspective, we're not going to know what's going on here until it's over. Any idea how long this will take? As long as it needs to, Anne said, bringing the clipboard over. She then handed it to Wade. Medical's online. Double check this. Will you please, Wade? Sure thing. Wade took the clipboard and began looking it over, and then looked at Dr. Director. How's the patient? She asked. Director then looked back towards the cylinder, where the medical team were restraining Faye. A Global Justice technician, under supervision from the Dweebs, was a finitigant over the helmet over her head. Still unconscious. I don't know what exactly happened between her and Ron, but she hasn't moved since he dragged her into the lobby. She mumbles every so often, but we can't make out what she's saying. And you sure Kim is still in there? According to Ron, Morgan let her out just long enough to cause a distraction. I'd say it's a good sign. If she were completely gone, I don't think Morgan would be able to do that. Who knows, Anne sighed. There's only have been ever a case like this before, and sadly all people who know anything about it are long gone, even with the modifications. Dr. Director put her hand free on Anne's shoulder. You raised a strong young woman, Dr. Possible. No matter how beaten down she was, I seriously doubt she's gone for good. She's still a survivor. I hope you're right. Anne then turned towards the simulator. Wade, are we ready? Just about, Wade answered. I asked the other Dr. Possible to track down something for me. It should help us give Kim a little bit of an edge. The elevator chimed and the doors opened and James stepped out, followed by Ron being pushed in a wheelchair by his father. Dad, I think I can walk. You should be with Mom. Ron was protesting. He had a splint on his nose and bandages were wrapped around his hands and head. His black eye was swollen to the size of a tennis ball. "Not a chance, Ronald," Mr. Stoppable said. "You're lucky that your mom even allowed you down here with me. If she had her way, you'd still be up in the medical unit." "That's where you should be," Anne said sternly. "Give me one good reason I shouldn't send you back up there, Ron." Ron fixated Anne with a quiet stare. "Because I love your daughter more than anything in the world. We both know what she wants me here." There was a tense pause. Then Anne smirked. "Yeah, that's a good reason. But you stay in that chair, understand?" "Yes, madam." "Miss Dr. Possible, ma'am?" Ron chirped, firing off a snappy salute. The goofy action relieved some of the attention in the room. Wade then turned to James. "Did you get it?" James smiled. "Looks like they haven't even bothered to get rid of Kimmy's stuff yet, and it was right on top of the box." He held up the communicator with one strap, and Wade took it from him and began fiddling with the buttons. "Great, let's see. Here it goes. Yes! Got it!" He crossed the room back to the cylinder and attached the communicator to Faye's wrist. He hit a button and the communicator began imitating the familiar 4-note chime. Wade then stepped back and signaled for Jim and Tim. "All set. Close it up." A warning alarm sounded and the door to the cylinder arched down and latched onto the position. A humming sound echoed throughout the lab as the stun cannons powered up. Wade, Jim, and Tim then took their positions at the VR computers, while Dr. Possible and the two members of the medical team began monitoring the medical fields. "What's the communicator for?" Ron asked. "I mean, it's not like she's going to be able to contact us from inside her own head." "I put a message explaining what's going on in the communicator," Wade explained, not looking up from the monitor. "Once we have confirmation that Faye's in the right state, I'll trigger the message to play. The alert chime will be designed to get Kim's attention. Kind of like if you fall asleep on the TV and what you get here is incorporated into your dreams." "Gotcha," Ron said. Then he settled back in the chair. "I guess there's not much I can do to help then, huh?" Wade then looked up and smiled. "You already did your part, Ron. From here on, it's up to Kim." Ron then nodded and looked up at the cylinder. "Good luck, KP." Kim frowned and opened her eyes. She sat up, rubbing the back of her head. She was sitting on the ground for some reason. The pink sand was sticking to the back of her arms and back up in a moment. Pink sand? Kim looked around perplexed. She was on a beach of a composed pink sand. Purple water crashed into the waves. Above her, the sky was completely but a vast expanse of blackness and touched by the horizon on all sides. Suddenly, a crate marker puffin fell from the sky and crashed right next to her. Kim leaped at her feet as it felt it on impact. The crate burst open, and 33 mauve and orange ducks wearing hip waddlers and fedoras scattered in all directions. One of them pausing to hand Kim a bill for every delivery before running off into the horizon. Kim then looked down at the bill, which quacked 3 times and bit on her hand. "Ow!" Kim yelped. The bill laughed and vanished over the horizon, following its owner. Kim then stared at it. "Well, that was random," she said. She brushed off the pink sand off her clothes. She did another double take. She was wearing her mission clothes, despite the fact that Global Justice had taken them from where she was first captured. After taking a few moments to deal with the nerves of pervs who had showed up on a dirty non-Disney prove scenes that have passed through the head, she stood right and fought. In the background of the old boys, they were chased by an axe-wielding Beretta. Something was very weird and happening here, Kim said at this point. Precisely beeping the communicator piped up. "Answer the beep already, jeesh." Kim then blinked and hit the button. "Wade, did Global Justice drop LSD in my water supply or something?" "Kim," came from Wade's voice from the communicator. "This is a recording, so don't try to ask questions. Ron managed to subdue Faye during the fight. She let you out just long enough to distract him, which meant we had a chance for this to work. We put Faye into a hypnotic state, which is allow you to wake up. But there's also one thing. So is she. And basically, well, what you're seeing around you isn't real." Kim then looked around. The ocean had washed the beach away, and now she was standing on the head of a 17-foot statue of Marlon Brando. "Gee, you could have fooled me," she muttered. Wade's recording continued. What we have done is put you in a metal landscape where you and Faye confront each other. Here's the catch, though. We can't bring you up until one of you is left." Wade's voice sighed. "You're going to have to kill her, Kim. Otherwise," he trailed off. After a few seconds, he spoke again. "In any event, this message was to set to trigger when we got the readings that both you were mentally active, so be careful. Faye's out there somewhere and probably not happy. Good luck, Kim." The recording ended and the screen went dark. Kim then sighed and looked around. "Okay, so this is all in my mind, which means I shall be able to control what I see, so..." Kim concentrated on the purple ocean crashed around her, washing the remains of the pink beach. The crate and the statue of Marlon Brando away, as the water recorded into the distance. Normal green grass sprung up, and after a few moments, trees began sprouting until Kim found herself in the vast forest. She looked up and saw the trees, and saw that the sky was a flat, black void. "Well, you can't have everything," Kim muttered, as she began making her way through the forest. As she walked, she became aware of the distant rumbling. She felt vibrations coming from the ground, and up to her feet, she began running. After a few minutes, she skidded to a halt. The rumbling was set to get louder. She could see movement further ahead in the forest. She cursed mentally. The word appeared to be in front of her, and scampered off into the forest. "Okay, I'm gonna have to watch what I think of during all this," Kim said. The rumbling was now accompanied by a series of crashes. Trees then began disappearing from the cluster in front of the movement and resulted in itself into a moving flash of dirty yellow. "Oh boy," Kim gulped, as the last few trees vanished under the giant threads of a 4-story tall bulldozer. Up in the cab, Faye Morgan, wearing a hard hat, brought down the mammoth machine to bear on Kim. "So you woke up?" Faye's voice came out booming loud of the speaker. "Well, I guess I'm just gonna have to kill you all over again. Yay for me!" Kim then quickly turned, fired the emergency grapples from the communicator, swung up to the trees, and as she rose, she grabbed the grapple gun from her hip holster, fired and swung to the next tree. Alerting the grapples, she made her way through the forest. Behind her, Faye snarled and turned up the speed on the bulldozer, smashing the trees mercilessly under the tree threads. Kim then glanced over her shoulder, trying to keep an eye on Faye's progress. Faye made eye contact and sneered to the point ahead of her. Kim quirked an eyebrow and then turned back to look ahead of her. As she yelped as she ran out of the trees, found herself swinging onto mid-air of the edge of a 70-foot cliff. She quickly spun around in the air and fired her communicator grapple of a limb of the last tree. She swung back towards the cliff, intending to disengage at the top of the arc and the land behind the oncoming bulldozer. This plan was abruptly aborted when Faye drove the behemoth over the edge of the cliff. Kim hastily corrected her arc and let go, beginning running over to the top of the bulldozer as it passed for the edge of the cliff. She leaped into the air and reached out the end of it and began somersaulting towards the ground. "Oh, no, you don't!" Faye cried. There was a hiss and Kim felt something wrap around her ankle and tugged her backwards. She looked down and stared at the cable around her leg, to which it was attached to her grapple gun in Faye's hand. "Are you insane?" Kim yelled as the bulldozer went off the cliff, pulling her with it. "Damn!" Kim groaned and she rolled onto her back. Note to self, never ask a crazy person if they're insane. She sat up and looked around. Instead of being in the middle of the woods that she had been spreading out at the bottom of the cliff, she was now instead sitting on a marble floor of a cavernous room that looked familiar to the Cafredo. There was a large hole in the ceiling, presumably by the way it was made of her entrance. By all logic, the fall could have shattered nearly every bone in her body, if not killed her outright. That she was able to get to her feet no difficulty and had complete absence of pain was another reminder that she wasn't dealing with logic. She took a couple of steps, looking around the interior of the Cafredo. The stained glass windows had been shattered. A few pews in the room were neither broken or overturned. There was no altar. The only sound was of Kim's heels as she walked through the room. "Faye," she called out. "Come out." Kim froze as a psychotic giggle echoed throughout the room. She frowned. "I'm not kidding, Faye. Come on out, now." The giggle turned into an evil laugh. Kim stepped back into a fighting stance and then continued moving forward when Faye began to recite. "Who killed Robin?" I said, "The sparrow, with my bow and arrow." Faye suddenly appeared from behind a column and at the far side of the room. She held a large compound bow, a vicious-looking arrow with serrated barbs nocked. A quiver of arrows was slung onto her back. "I killed Robin," she finished as she let the arrows fly. Kim then dropped to her knees and bent backwards. The arrow barely met passing over her chest as it flew across the room and embedded herself onto the wall. "Aw, damn," Faye said in a mock of disappointment. "That would have been so cool if it had hit you." "Oh well." She reached behind her and pulled out 3 arrows from the quiver and knocked them simultaneously. "Guess we'll have to try this." The arrows streaked across the room. Kim then leaped into the air as Faye let them fly. She somersaulted through the air and came crashing down to her alter ego, a foot connecting solidly to Faye's face. No sooner had Kim impacted than Faye's hand had shot up and grabbed her ankle, dragging Kim onto the floor. The two rolled across the floor, stopping when they had hit one of the columns supporting the roof. Unfortunately for Kim, Faye was on top. With an arrow in her hand, Faye's sadistic grin returned. Kim's moved up, but Faye grabbed her hair and with her free hand and smacked Kim's head against the marble floor. Kim's eyes crossed and her vision blurred. Faye kept the grip on Kim's hair and raised an arrow. "Now this is more like it," Faye cowered. "Up close and personal." She brought the barb arrow down, intending to shove it into Kim's left eye, but just before it connected, Kim's hand shot up, grabbed Faye's wrist and shoved hard, forcing Faye to drive the arrow through her own thigh. Faye screeched in pain as she let go of Kim's hair, giving the teen hero the opportunity to get back up on her feet and plant them into Faye's chest. She shoved hard, sending Faye across the room and far at the wall. Not giving Faye any time to recover, Kim got to her feet and leaped into the air, folding her legs underneath her, impacting with her knees. Faye uttered a gasp as the air was forced out of her lungs. Kim grabbed the sides of Faye's head and slammed it back into the wall behind her. "You take over my life," Kim snarled. "You threaten my family. You make Ron chase you all over Paris." She slammed Faye's head into the wall again and again. "You crippled Shigo. You put Bonnie in the ICU. You get global justice to break their own rules." Kim then grabbed the front of Faye's shirt and hauled her up. She then glared into the dazed violet eyes. "Oh yeah," she finished. "And you try to hang me." Kim then spun around and threw Faye back across the room in the opposite direction. Faye hit the floor on her face and slid to a halt. Kim then walked up towards her. "I've had enough of you, Faye. I've had enough of the violence of the ego and the general bitchiness, and I'm putting a stop to it. Right now. You're done." Faye didn't even respond. She didn't even move. Kim just frowned at her. "Did you hear me? You're done." "I heard you." Faye's voice was muffled by the floor. She then looked up and pushed herself up with her hands. "And you're wrong." Faye got to her feet and Kim stepped back into her battle stance. Faye then tilted her head from side to side, a vertebrae cracking audibly and echoing throughout the cathedral. "I'm not done," Faye said, walking slowly towards Kim. "I'm never done. I'm always there, Kim. I'm every nasty little thought you ever had, every dark little impulse you ever felt, every little evil feeling you tried to suppress. You think if you beat me here and you take control for good, I am going to go away? Oh, sure, I won't be able to wreak havoc personally anymore, but I'll always be there watching from the darkness parts of your mind, urging you on, telling you to take the other way out. You've done it before." "I have not," Kim protested, not letting her guard down. "I would never. Bueno Nacho headquarters, Shigo the Bad, the Storm, Dr. Draken's broadcast tower," Faye interrupted, irritation in her voice. "That was me. All those kinds of thoughts were always me. I may not have a name, or a voice, or a body, but if all those things are me, DNA me didn't create me, Kim. You did." Kim's expression turned into shock. Her hands lowered slightly, and she uncoincidentally began moving backwards. "I don't think like that." Faye laughed. Everybody thinks like that. It's primal. It's the lizard we all have in our brain, and that's where I come from. Where I live. All the formula did the making strong enough to take on a physical form. That's what it did. That's why I'm here. Suddenly, Faye's hands shot out and grabbed Kim's shoulders. Kim then gasped as she was pulled off to her feet into a twist reflection. Faye's twist up in a sadistic smile. Kim was amazed that she had never noticed how sharp Faye's canines were before now. And that's why I'll win. You really think you could beat me? You think this cheap mental trick is going to help you give the upper hand? Do you even know who you're up against? With an inhuman roar, Faye then spun and threw Kim across through one of the windows. The remaining stained glass shatters, and Kim screamed as she fell 3 stories to the ground outside. She hit hard on the air rushing out of her lungs. She looked back up at the window. Faye stood, framed shattered glass, grinning. She yelled down at Kim, "I'm Mr. Goddamn Hyde, show you a little respect." Faye then leaped out from the window and dove face first towards the grounds, her fist extended, intending to drive into Kim's ribs. Kim tried to move, but the air still hadn't returned. She was helpless. "She's crashing!" One of the medical techs cried out, and then leapt out from the station and went to the cylinder, interpiercing another member of the medical team. "Don't open it," she ordered. The tech stared at her. "That's your daughter. And if you open it now, the shock may kill her anyway. Flood the cylinder with oxygen and hit the edges." "Doing it now," Jim said, and from the abandoned tech station, all the lights flickered as the shock paddles were built into the cylinder fired, electrically stimulating the heart. The EKG spiked a number of times and then steadied to a beeping became regular. And looked at the tech. "Sorry, I know you were just trying to help." The tech nodded and went back to his station, and then returned to hers. And as she did so, James caught her and hugged her tightly. Across the room, Ron wheeled himself over towards Wade. "How's she doing?" he asked. "Not good," Wade replied. "They have to end this soon." "What's going on?" "I've been monitoring her body. Every time one of them gets the upper hand, the body changes to reflect. It's happening almost on a second-to-second basis. The DNA is rapidly wearing out. If one of them doesn't win this fight soon..." Ron looked at Wade. What if somebody doesn't win?" Wade sighed. "If somebody doesn't win soon, the only thing coming out of that cylinder is a dead body." Kim then felt the pain coursing through her, radiating from her chest, where Faye had impact. She rolled onto her side, and she felt that she needed to throw up, to rest, just to close her eyes and let it all go away. Faye was standing over her, smiling again. "Time's up, Kimmy. Time to step aside and let the new girl take over." Faye then straddled Kim's prone form and pulled it back a fist, extending her fingers and claws. "But I'll make it quick. Least I could do, really." "Go to hell," Kim gasped out. "You first," Faye replied, then thrust her hand forward. Suddenly, both of them screamed in pain as electricity aced through them. Faye then rolled off and Kim collapsed next to her. There were 3 more jolts, and then the 2 of them were still. A sensation faded, and Kim found that the pain she was feeling from the injuries of Faye have inflicted had them severely diminished. She then looked over towards Faye, who was curled up into a fetal position. "That was real," Kim whispered herself. "The electricity was real. What's it doing to ourselves? That is not real." Her eyes widened, the truth hit her. This is our mind. This isn't our real bodies. And if the bodies aren't real, then neither is the pain. Kim then leaped onto her feet and grabbed Faye, hauling her upright. She grinned at her evil counterpart. "My turn," she said, before throwing Faye into another section of the graveyard. She quickly followed her, dodging the headstones and shrines. And as she turned the corner, as Faye's monstrous howl yelped as Faye struck her from behind, Kim bounced off the shrine, and Faye responded by her clotheslining with her arm. Faye's expression of triumph turned into astonishment as Kim astonishingly spun around her arm into the air, slammed her foot down into Faye's shoulder. Faye snarled and backflipped, trying to catch Kim with her foot. Kim then bent backwards and turned it towards a backflip of her own. The 2 of them faced off and charged forward, and as she got closer, Kim dropped to her knees and slid forward towards her nemesis. Kim's first flew up and connected with Faye's jaw. Faye responded with a punch to Kim's nose. The two of them had gotten to their feet, and now they were fighting, approximately enough in a graveyard outside of the cathedral. Kim executed back a kick towards Faye's midsection. Faye then took a step back at the last possible second and caught Kim's heel in both hands. She then smirked and thrust upward, causing Kim to flip in midair. The smirk was quickly wiped out of her face as Kim continued to flip in an impressive 360 degrees arc and then caught her foot right underneath Faye's chin. Faye then flew into the air and crashed into the wall of the mausoleum. Kim had landed on her feet and strode across the graveyard towards Faye. Faye then groaned and sat up. The both were disheveled and exhausted. Despite their sheer slavery against their battles, there was no blood. "Time to finish this," Kim said quietly. "You know we have to finish this." Faye smiled again. "Yeah, we do. You could feel it this time. Can't you?" Kim nodded. "We're dying. This body changing of us is taking the advantage, and our DNA is wearing out. We're out of time." "We haven't got long enough to settle this," Faye said, getting to her feet. Kim then stepped back, one by one, taking up the defensive stance. "I don't suppose you'll be willing to settle this with a game of rock, paper, scissors?" she asked. Faye laughed, genuine, almost honest laughter. "Oh, I wish it were that simple. But we have one more thing in common anything else, don't we?" "We both hate losing," Kim answered, cracking her knuckles. "All or nothing, then." "Sounds good to me," Faye replied, cracking her neck again. She then shook out her arms. Two of them were ready to take up positions facing each other, muscles tense, eyes unblinking. Faye then clenched up her unclenched hands. Kim then tossed her hair out of her eyes. "You ready?" Faye called out. "Ready when you are," Kim answered. There was a brief pause. That both of them were screaming at the top of their lungs as they charged. 3 of the computer stations exploded. The medical hideouts went haywire. Global Justice officers dashed for the fire extinguishers. The lights flickered and then went out. A red emergency lightning kicking on. "Status report," Dr. Director called. "What the hell happened?" "Working on it," Wade replied. He typed in for a few moments, then threw up it in his hands. "The system's frozen. We got nothing." "There's only one way to find out," Ron said. He got out of the wheelchair and ran towards the cylinder, reached down and grabbed the lip of the lid and heaved. The lid didn't even move, so Kim took a few deep breaths and then focused and then hauled again. His hands began eradicating a blue aurora as the lid had shifted. Soon the hydraulics caught and the lid opened the rest of the way on its own. Ron pulled off the dead VR helmet and hauled her unconscious from the cylinder. The rest of them gathered around as Ron sat on the floor, cradling in his arms. The red lightning just made it impossible to determine who had won. "We need a light over here," Dr. Director called. Dr. Possible then kneeled down next to Ron. "Kimmy?" James asked. "Kim?" Anne cried out. "Come on, Kimmy, wake up." "KP!" Ron cried. The eyelets fluttered. A tech arrived with a flashlight, and as Dr. Director turned it on, placed the beam on her face. The hair wasn't blood red of Faye, but not the more traditional red-headed tone of Kim either. The features of the face were soft like Kim's, but the face itself was thin, more irregular shape of Faye's. Ron gritted his teeth in anticipation as she began to blink rapidly. The Global Justice Ancient's tense, ready for the worst. Finally, her eyes opened. Her lush emerald eyes. "Kim!" Ron cried. Kim smiled weakly. "Miss me?" she asked. Ron answered by just kissing her deeply.